And after having heard from the regulator, we will now hear more about future regulatory developments from the Ministry of Justice. I'm very happy to welcome Fedor Meerts, Department Head Integrity and Gambling at the Ministry of Justice and Security. I expect that Fedor will be able to tell us more about what is in store for the industry. I would also like to remind everyone that you can submit questions through the Slido app, point at the middle QR code of your badge, or go to slido.com and use the event code GIH. But Fedor, please make it to the stage. The floor is all yours. Dank je wel.
Thank you, Willem, for the introduction and for arranging this beautiful venue. I don't know, René, you also had this experience, I think. I can't see you very well because there's a lot of light, but I hope you can see me well. Last time I was here, we were mulling about what to do with the advice from the Council of State. That was, I think, at the end of December. We were speaking in this setting. Well, as you have seen, we've made some decisions on that, and I'll go into detail on that. Where René finished with the market outlook, I will start with one. I'm also very interested to see the results that were just there from the poll that was just done, and of the outlook from the industry itself. What I noticed in the beginning, it was all very optimistic, and I'm maybe the persons who have a more pessimistic look took a little bit longer to fill in the app. But in the end, I think about 70% were optimistic or moderately optimistic. And that is also how we look at the market, especially when we see also some developments in channelization and also developments when it comes to finding the measures that help players, for instance, the register. When we talk about these players, I think something that we also said in a letter that we sent to Parliament last week was we see a lot of new players. And while this might be uncomfortable for some, for us from a policy perspective, it is not really that relevant. What is very relevant for us is how well these players are protected. And that's something that I'll go into detail about during my speech today. We've seen very good developments when it comes to the market development, but we've also seen some developments that need, for us, urgent attention. Well, the first one I think is clear when it comes to the broad amount of untargeted marketing that reaches quite a lot of vulnerable groups. But secondly, also when it comes to the duty of care, the implementation of that, and the use of playing limits. Let me start with the marketing restrictions, because those I think are the most in the public view at the moment. We saw, like René also said, quite effective, I think, in the first months, self-regulation after the political debates ended in requests to limit, restrict regulation, the options for advertising. However, what we've also seen after those first months, where especially out-of-home advertisement almost vanished from the Dutch streets, we've seen that come back. We've seen that come back very much, actually. It's at the level or even higher than it was before at the moment and in the last few months. And also on my bike ride here from the station, I saw quite a few outdoor advertisements for online casinos, although also I think just as many for cultural activities in Amsterdam, but that might have been the neighborhood. I think it shows, however, that there is a need for regulations, rules that apply to all. Well, that is one of the starting points that we had when making the new rules. 1st of July, the decree will enter into force, and it will, in principle, basically, it means untargeted advertising is no longer allowed, and there's a transition period for sponsoring. However, as we find that it remains key that targeted advertising is still allowed, because it is key that consumers find their way to the legal offer and not to the illegal offer, there are opportunities to still use advertisement in especially the online sphere. and through direct marketing. And that's something I would like to stress here. When we had all these discussions with the sector, with companies which are very much familiar with advertisement, with experts, those talks were always about how do we arrange it in such a way that there is space for this targeted advertising, but no space for the untargeted advertising. And that's also how I think the legislation must be seen. That's also how we came to a quite clear rule of 95%. It was a long discussion whether we should have a target like that or not. In the end, we decided to do that because the norm is 95%. And the norm at the moment, well, in principle, is about 80, 70%. Well, that norm is not high enough. It will be 95%. I've already today had quite a few discussions, and René also referred to them already, about how to implement these new rules. I think it's very good that these discussions are now taking place, that there's a lot of information being shared by operators, by media companies, on how they think this could work and the questions they have. And in the end, like René said, it is up to the operators to make this work, and it's up to the KSA, the regulatory authority, to enforce the rules. The core of our policy effort, the coming period, will definitely be around the prevention of gambling addiction. That's also something which was the core of the letter that was sent to Parliament last week. And this will be done around 4 pillars. The first pillar is that players and the people around players are well informed of the risks of gambling and also of opportunities or places where they can find help. The second is fitting interventions, where the duty of care is the main tool. The third is fitting help and care for persons who have gone too far and may have a gambling problem. And the fourth, very important, also for the long run, is increasing the knowledge base on the prevention of gambling addiction. By the end of the year, the Ministry of Health, the KSA, and the Ministry of Justice will come with a joint work program on gambling addiction, preventing gambling addiction. But at the moment, of course, we are already doing quite a few things, and some of this work has already started. And there's 3 things I would like to highlight. First of all is awareness activities. As you might be aware, we've always taken quite a conservative approach to awareness activities because of the fear that awareness activities actually might induce more prevalent gambling. Well, we've had very, very many discussions about this with also the experts in the field, and have decided that in this case, the government definitely needs to do more. So there's at least, there's at the moment 3 pilot projects which are starting. One is very much aimed at children, or young adults actually, at schools. Which is called the Clear at School program, which is run by the Trimbos Institute, which is really aimed at early detection of problematic behavior. The second is helping people who are already in debts with information and advice about problem gambling through the Money Fit Guide, which is done through the National Debt Help Route. And the third is to also increase the options for training, digital training in this case, for first-line professionals who might be the first ones to actually signal that something is wrong. And you can think of doctors, psychologists, but also people who help when it comes to debts. Next to this, we're now looking into the opportunities to actually start a broader, targeted still, but much broader information program targeted at young adults. The second is a duty of care. I think René already said most what I had to say about that, but we are looking very much interested in what comes out of your research and to see whether it is necessary to raise the bar so that there is consistent and adequate implementation of this duty of care. The third playing limits. Well, there's been quite a bit of discussion about this between us here, but also in the political arena. Playing limits are already a very important instrument to protect players against excessive playing and problem gambling. The examples that we've seen over the last 1.5 years, which unfortunately continue up to today, have made us have a second look at the rules as they are now. And we've done this with input from scientists, amongst others, with former players, operators, and of course the regulatory authority. And these first consultations show that an effective approach cannot and should not be limited to just thinking about the player limits. It's about the whole atmosphere around this as well. It's about effective behavioral nudging at registration, so that persons think before they put a number in. It's about an upper playing limit as well, of course, after which a player needs to take informed action to raise his limits. And this is also something that we will be developing. And I think it's very important that the Dutch legislation at the moment puts the player in charge of his playing limits. And that is how the Dutch legislation works at the moment. So that's also the framework in which we are at the moment thinking. And a third is possible interventions before, during, and after play, for instance, historic playing reports. As was already said, you can expect detailed proposals by the end of this year on this. And in this, the input from the sector is crucial, because you are the only ones who know what is actual player behavior, well, of course, the regulatory authority as well, what is actual player behavior. And we're very happy to see a good input, for instance, in the nudging pilot, which is now being done by the Dutch Scientific Institute, and also by providing us with data on actual player behavior. Then looking forward, next year we are actually already going to be evaluating the legislation as it is in 2024. We're laying the foundation for this year. And this will be independent scientific research in which data and also feedback on how the current regulation is working from the sector is much needed. And I'm also happy to see all the interest already in this. I expect this evaluation to be followed by legislative changes. René already mentioned one area, but there are quite a few areas in which we see we need to make some changes, especially when it comes to enhancing consumer protection and the prevention of gambling addiction. And of course, where appropriate and where necessary, we of course will also look at other legislative challenges. For instance, for land-based slot machines, which is an area where we are running really into outdated legislation. I wish you a very interesting day. I'm very interested also in the discussion that will be coming up next on privatization. We've already seen a discussion in the political arena on the 1st of June on this, with very interesting political positions already being taken. So I'm very interested to see the sector perspective on this. And I see I've managed my time, so there hopefully will be time for some questions.
There's even time for 1 or 2 questions. So
Very
Fedor,
good.
please stay with us for a second. I think we have a first question from the room. If you can show the gentleman, give him the microphone. So first question we have here. Sorry,
Disappeared.
blank question. You won't know the age of. It's a very technical question, but I understand this is a burning question for some of you. You won't know the age of your visitors at the gate. What if you find out retrospectively that there are day, week, or monitor outliers? It's a very technical question.
Yeah. Well, and I think when it comes to the actual implementation of this is really a question more for René. But I can tell you at least how we have what our thoughts were and how we wrote it down in the legislation. I think there's two hard rules in the new legislation. First is people need to be able to opt out themselves. That is a hard rule. You need to provide that. And the second is you need to make sure that the advertising you make, 95% reaches persons who are 24 years and older. And you need to check that, well, you need to be confident before, and you need to check after if you've actually managed that. That is the rule. So the rule actually already leaves space for these outliers. And if you see that you have too many outliers, meaning that you are, well, less than 95%, you have a problem. That means you have to adjust, and you have to make sure that you make 95%.
Great. Thank you, Fedor. We have a second question. If you could pass the microphone. If you could please state your name and your company.
Hi, Fedor. My name is Frank Opdewoord for Casino News. We've talked before. You've clearly stated that in the degree, the 95% should be 24 years of age and older. But you also mentioned in the decree examples of reporting tools like Nobo and Google Analytics. Is it fair for us to assume that the extrapolation that's happening in these tools is something that is acceptable and goes in line with what the decree when it was published?
Well, I know we've been having these discussions, and in the end, this is really also something that time will tell. René also just said we do not know everything. What we do know, as we said in the legislation, you need to use the best available tools, technical measures that there are, and we've had many discussions, especially also with the media parties, on what those are. And at the moment, the ones, a number of them are mentioned in the legislation, and those tools at the moment already use extrapolation. That's all I can say. This is where we stand right now, and I think from here it's really a debate between operators, between the media partners, who of course need to follow what the operators tell them in the end, and between the regulatory authority to see how we can make sure that people are maximum protected.
Great. Thank you, Fedor. Thank you very much for your participation, and see you later. Thank you very much.